Kevin, I'm delighted to see you again.
Yeah, nice to see you, Bruce. We're transatlantic here once again, me in Berlin and you in United States,
Yeah.
wherever.
And what
Yeah.
and this time we're going to discuss a book at your suggestion, A Single Man by Chris Isherwood. This is a image of the first edition, which I could not find. I have a an edition here which follows the movie version, which came out a few years ago. I think it was 2009. I think it was 2009. And I
Yeah, sounds
actually, in
right.
preparation, I actually watched the movie after I read the
Ah,
book.
very good.
But this is your idea. So
Yeah.
tell us a bit about this book from your perspective.
Well, from my perspective, as I was reading it, I guess about the third time, I'd first read it maybe 20 years back, discovered it late in life. Uh, I was thinking of that little uh, proviso at the beginning of Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn, where he talks about, he says, persons attempting to find a motive in this narrative will be prosecuted. Persons attempting to find a moral in it will be banished. Persons attempting to find a plot in it will be shot. There's not much plot. There's no apparent motive why the author felt compelled to write it. And there's definitely no moral, I shouldn't think. So that off the top, what's the book about? Well, it's about a man, a single man, per the title. He is much like the author, Christopher Isherwood himself, a homosexual living in Los Angeles, and it is in the fall of 1962. His lover has died, his companion, partner, whatever you want to call it, Jim has died. And George, the protagonist, we find him waking up in bed. The day starts. He is off and running. He is a professor at a local college, probably Cal State, LA, where Isherwood himself taught. We follow him into his class. We follow him out of the class. We see him having lunch with colleagues. He then goes off to the hospital to visit a dying woman who had had a brief affair with his Jim. So Jim was apparently bisexual. He has this little visit, very odd, it seems to me, but he has this little visit with this woman. Then he is off to the gym to work out, as any good Angelino does after he's through with work. Then he goes to the supermarket. A little bit of a consumer culture critique goes on there, as you might imagine. He, in the evening, has dinner and drinks with fellow expat Brit Charlotte. Charlie is called. And I think part of the novel that comes about four-fifths through is sort of the climax of the novel. It's these two Brits talking about home. You know, what is home? Is it Britain? Is it LA? Uh, is it the past? Is it the future? What is it? Right? I think that's the heart of the novel right there for me.
And
And then it
also, I
ends.
mean, and
Yeah,
also, sorry, Kevin, in that particular discussion, it's also about are you heterosexual or homosexual? Because she knows that he's homosexual, but she, being abandoned by her husband, has designs on him, and he knows that she has designs on him. In fact, it turns out that she's made what's a pass in the language of the day. She's made a pass at him
yeah,
several times already, and kisses him goodnight, slips a tongue in, which she's done
yeah.
before.
That's right. Yeah.
It's kind of funny in a very dark way, and that gets to identity and all those sorts of things. But yeah,
Right.
that keep going.
No, that's it. Thanks for bringing that element in the sexual orientation element as well. Well, he escapes unscathed, George, from Charlie's clutches, and he heads off to a bar. He lives near the coast in LA, probably Santa Monica, so not quite LA proper, but Pacific Palisades. Think again where Isherwood himself lived. Goes off to a beachside bar, and what a coincidence, and it is, it seems. He meets a student of his there, and there's a lot of sort of sexual interplay going on there because George is interested in the student as a romantic adventure, at very least. And they go swimming out in the ocean. They come back to George's place. They have more drinks, and there's more of this kind of sexual interplay, byplay. Nothing ends up happening. This young student, he goes off. George goes to bed, and that's the end of the story. That's the end of the book. We don't know if George actually dies or not. There's a sort of ambiguous ending there where Isherwood plays it kind of coy, I think. He's saying George is in great health, but he's lying there. He's in this unconscious state, and anything can happen. And then he imagines his death. He describes his death for over about 2 or 3 pages. Uh, it's not clear if George does die or he's just imagining it. The author. It kind of bothered me, that ending. I didn't quite go for it, but anyway, that's a summary of the book.
Yeah, I thought the ending, by the way, was a coy autobiographical, semi-autobiographical trick where the author is still alive,
Yeah,
but is imagining the future because he's identifying with the protagonist so much as himself.
yeah.
It's almost like he can't kill him off because he doesn't. He's like, what could happen to me? Well, I could have a heart attack tomorrow in my sleep,
Right.
and
Yeah,
maybe that's the best way to go. So he
yeah.
sort
It's
of
almost
said,
like, yeah, it's almost like an author fiddling around with the ending, trying to figure it out.
"Yeah,
How is he going to end it? But he doesn't. He doesn't come down on one side or the other. He leaves you sort of hanging. Does George die, or is he still alive, or is he in some kind of suspended animation for the rest of his life? Is that the thrust of what Isher was trying to tell us? I don't know.
yeah, yeah." I mean, twice on the second to last page, he says, "Let us suppose."
Yeah,
So just let us suppose, however, that he's got this medical condition, and let us suppose this merely the thing,
right.
the snoring, and there's a blood clot, blah 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 blah.
He says
Yeah,
it.
it's
Yeah, he says it 3 times actually. Very well. Let us suppose that this is the night and the hour and the appointment. Yes, he goes. He does says it 3 times. He's really. I don't know what he's doing there. Actually, tell you the truth, it's sort of a mystery to me.
well, it's a very morbid book, and we should point out it's interesting that we dwelt on the ending first, which is a death. It's the death of the protagonist. The whole thing is very morbid, and we should point this out to people who may have watched the movie and not read the book. The movie is not morbid. It introduces a suicidal narrative. It makes the
Mm.
protagonist suicidal in the movie, which is not true in the book.
Yep.
But the protagonist in the movie is virtuous, unlike the book.
No, no, yeah, not virtuous at all in the book.
Kind-hearted. He is liked.
Yeah.
He doesn't take advantage of people. He notices people's sexuality, but he doesn't take advantage of it. He's self-controlled. None of these things are true of George in the book,
No.
and the book is is quite difficult to read. I'll make this more of a personal statement. I found it quite difficult to read because it's morbid. It but it's fascinating because it smoothly describes in the present tense at times what it's like to be in a decaying body and to have regrets and to be play acting at still being uh, a active participant in society, and but having this inner talk about, oh, I'm decrepit and I have a terrible temper and I really don't want to be alone. Uh, and Jim betrayed me, right? That is also not in the movie. So Jim was adulterous, and there are frank admissions about how tense and negative a relationship can be when two people live together. It's not a sunny book. It is funny at times, but it's quite morbid and therefore quite difficult to keep going. Except the style of it. That there's an attraction in the frankness of about the morbidity and some of the stylistically some of the descriptions of uncomfortable things like this inner thought. So his inner thoughts are not admirable, but they're so smooth. It's actually very interesting to read.
Yeah, there's a kind of a lucid, objective quality to his observations, and I agree with you. I find Isherwood. I first discovered him with the Berlin stories. I don't know if you've read those, but on which the movie Cabaret is based. You know, the Sally Bowles character, and it's the same sort of style. He opens up uh, that book, Berlin Stories, with "I am a camera." That, in fact, was the name of the play, which was subsequently made from the Berlin Stories, which then became Cabaret. But I am a camera, like this objective lens, seeing things. That's what he does here very well. I very much admire Isherwood's prose style on that count.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I suppose we should admire the honesty of the man, the author. So this is clearly very semi-autobiographical, but it's quite uh, negative about himself. That this character is tempestuous like himself, is prone to straying like himself, is very cynical, and actually
Absolutely.
that sort of that plays into the one of the themes we want to continue from our last discussion, which he's British, and he plays a cynical Briton in America. So he's cynical about Americans, even though he has chosen to be an American person. There's sort of this hypocrisy and ambiguity that comes out of the ambivalence of America about America. So why are you American if you're ambivalent about America and particularly Californians and his neighbors? He doesn't. He really doesn't have any close friends. Like his closest friend is Charlie, but he has a very cynical relationship with her. His inner talk, even when he's having a external talk with her on the phone, his inner talk that we are privy to as the reader is quite scathing of her flaws. At the same time, he's scathing about his own flaws. So that's what I find most interesting about the presentation here is this inner talk.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the whole novel as being sort of a very nuanced study of the unspoken words that people have in their interactions with one another. That's what I like most about it, in fact, this novel, and that's why I told you I wanted you to read the novel as opposed to us just watching the movie, because there's so much that's lost in the movie just because it's the inner monologue, which takes up most of the novel here. And
Yes,
that's what I be wonderfully done.
yes. I mean, the we should say about the movie. The movie is really only takes out the homosexuality and sort of glorifies it, whereas
Yeah,
Isherwood is quite honest about the difficulties of being a homosexual, particularly in the 1960s. So one of his neighbors calls him a queer in at least in Isherwood's assumption, or the protagonist's assumption about what his neighbors are talking about. Certainly, the neighbors are not close. I mean, again, the protagonist has this cynical attitude towards his neighbors, and he loses his temper with the kids, and he seems to hate the kids because they are ill mannered, and and he describes the adults, the parents, as being uh, sexually wayward and um, living a lie. You know, they're very commercialist. That once describes them as living their little kingdom. So their little cul-de-sac is their little kingdom. So as long as they're king of that domain, when they go to parties at each other's homes, uh, they feel big, and he's
Yeah.
portraying them as small
Yeah.
and petty, and
Yeah, he
yeah.
definitely looks askance at the middle class American heterosexual dream. He definitely does.
Yes.
What? Yeah. I mean, there's no two ways about it. You know, he's seeing it from a homosexual man's point of view, and the conclusions he draws are not unexpected. And One thing, here's what I wanted to say as you were talking. I was thinking about this. You know, he is very scathing. He is very cynical uh, about everything. You're right, and particularly Americans. Yes, why not? Well, these are the people surrounding him. These are the people he's going to be judging. But I also found him surprisingly um, supportive of the of Americans, or rather Angelinos, in certain situations. For example, there's this, what is her name? I have it written here. There's this professor at the university, Cynthia Leach, and she's a New Yorker. And she just came back from Mexico, and she starts to go off on this diatribe about, oh, Mexico's so authentic, you know, and I come back to California with these horrid motels and everything, and he just goes into the breach, and he just slams her. He does a verbal body slam on her. Could I read maybe that section briefly, Bruce?
Yeah,
Would you mind? Yeah,
yeah, of
because
course, go
here's
ahead.
where he really comes to the defense of the American way and modern American uh, technology. He says, after she gets done, uh, he says, honestly, are you out of your mind? My God, you sound like some dreary French intellectuals who's just set foot in New York for the first time. That's exactly the way they talk. Unreal. American motels are unreal. He goes on and on. Uh, we've reduced the things of the material for them. Okay, excuse me. We've reduced the things of the material plane to mere symbolic conveniences. So he's arguing for the American standardization of things. And he ends by saying, are essentially we're creatures of spirit. So he flips it. Americans aren't materialists, they're creatures of spirit. They don't have time for all this you know, talk and thought about what's authentic or what's inauthentic. Our life is all in the mind. That's why we're completely at home with symbols like the American motel room, whereas the European has a horror of symbols because he's such a groveling little materialist. So he comes to the defense of Americans in certain situations. Another situation is where he's having those late night drinks with Charlie up at her place. And she starts to get all moony about merry old England, and her Wuthering Heights dream, and he just shatters it. He says, "Are you crazy? I mean, you want to go back to these drafty, cold, uh, you know, manor homes. I mean, we want to update our standard of living here, baby. You know." And he just shatters her dream of the England that, in fact, before, just a heartbeat before, he in fact was touting, because at one point Jim and he had gone back to England together, and they were going through little towns that reminded Jim of a Tennyson poem, and they went to a little pub on the moor, and it was so quaint, and he's they get drunk and they come out of the pub, and he has met some English fellow, and they start reciting poetry together, some patriotic poem from the Victorian era. I have it here, Newbolt's Vitae Lampada. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Where there's one line, play up, and play the game. It's like he's all in for this version of home and England. And then as soon as she jumps on the bandwagon, when he slaps her down, he says, "Are you crazy? This is nuts." So he's obviously a very riven character, George, probably reflecting Isherwood's own point of view or point
Yeah,
of
I mean,
views.
I think I'm going to qualify those passages a little, and you can argue with me about them. The way I read them both was that they're expressions of Isherwood's own contradictory views on America and Europeans. So he can be both defensive and offensive to these groupings, and that I think the example you just read of the European has a horror of symbols because he's such a groveling little materialist. Well, that to me sort of flips the conventional European um, or traditional upper middle class European critique of Americans. So it flips it on
Right.
its head. The Americans are not the materialists suddenly, the Europeans are the materialists. And when I was reading that passage, it's actually a monologue, right? It's like it's more
Oh
than
yeah.
it's about 2 pages long, and it reads like a stream of consciousness where it's almost sophistry, where he's just attacking at convenience, and he actually doesn't keep his line of argument straight. So his target flips. He makes the same critique of two sides of the contest here. And with Charlie, um, he clearly is cynical about her wish to go back to the old country and learn about how his upbringing was in a country house and he had a nanny and he could look over the moors. And yet, even though he's cynical about that, he does have these flashbacks to when he had a nanny, and it was all several times this happens in the novel where he wishes he could be back with nanny, and he has this thing with Kenny when Kenny rescues him from the surf. So the surf uh, knocks George over, and he's drunk, and he sort of loses his bearings, and Kenny drags him out, and George says, "Oh, I feel so," this is his inner talk. I feel so secure. It's just like nanny. I wish Kenny was my nanny. I could go right to sleep curled up in his arms. So he has this nostalgia, but he's critical of other people having nostalgia for the old country. The other
Right.
thing I mentioned, and then I want to hear your thoughts on this. The professor that he attacks for what was his name? Professor Leach was
Yeah.
it?
Leach. Yeah, I
Uh,
think I read it. Yeah. Leach.
yeah, he introduces her as this Easterner, this snobbish Easterner, which
Yeah.
links back to our previous conversation of Evelyn Waugh's The Loved One, which had an Easterner in California who was snobbish about California. California is not up to my Eastern standards of culture and good good commerce. And so it reminded me of that. So the Easterner is in California, but still has an Eastern snobbery about being in California.
Right. And he's not going to, he's not taking any of it. And I think for me, uh, if we had to sort of position George pro or con LA, let's keep it LA for a moment. He's really LA. He's an LA guy. I mean, for God's sake, he even likes the car culture. I mean, in the first pages when he's driving on the freeway to his college job, he's like enjoying it. It's like, who enjoys the freeway? Of course, now this was before the traffic jams. The traffic jams weren't in the early 60s. They kind of started happening in the mid to late 60s, early 70s. That's when they really got bad, and the smog really got bad. Although he mentions the smog, and there was that inversion layer always, ever since World War II. But I'm
Yeah, but
reading that, I'm
it's already
horrified.
crazy. Yeah, but the
Already crazy.
driving is already crazy. It's not. He doesn't really describe a jam, but people are driving very fast. And on 33 of my volume, he calls it the mad metropolitan chariot race,
Right.
jockeying from lane to lane with the best of them, never dropping below 80.
Yeah. But he likes that aspect of it. He doesn't like merging into the traffic, but he likes the feeling
Yeah,
of driving and everything. And he goes out for a drive. I don't know what it is. After he works out, he wants to just drive and kind of relax. So he uses driving as a relaxant. And I don't know. That used to be the LA attitude, no longer.
yeah,
But insofar, he's been really Los Angelesized that way. And
yeah,
he's part of the body beautiful culture. He's trying to keep in shape at age 58. He lives on the beach, and in the final pages, just before we have this description of him dying or not, there's this sort of meditation where he's thinking about whether he does want, in fact, yes, to go back to England. I mean, he's still struggling with the question, and he decides, no, I'm going to leave that past to the likes of Charlie. I will leave the future to the likes of Kenny, his student that he goes swimming with. Young boy, future belongs to him. And I will concentrate on now. And LA is the city of now. Okay, I thought that was kind of neatly done. And insofar, he's really, like I said at the top of this long, long statement, I think he does eventually. If you had to judge, he comes down the side of LA. He likes LA. It's good for a homosexual back then, LA, right? It's good for the things that he likes. He likes male bodies. Let's say it. I mean, we see that right off the bat where he's walking by the tennis courts to his class, and he can't take his eyes off these guys with their shirts off playing tennis. Okay, good, fine, but he likes that. He wouldn't get that in England. You're not going to have guys playing tennis with their shirts off in November in England. Okay, so he's a vitalist. George is a vitalist, and if you're a certain kind of vitalist, then Southern California, LA, is the place for you. So I felt a sort of kinship with him at that level. It's like, yeah, I understand. Yeah, that's why you like LA. That's a very legitimate reason for liking it, and there are many reasons not to. But he tends to the reasons that he likes it tend to outnumber the reasons he doesn't.
yeah. And I think there's also a part in that passage that you mentioned, the one where his inner talk is about should he go back to England or not. It ends it ends hopefully when
Yeah.
and the rest of the book hasn't been very hopeful. It's been about decline and covering up your decline. But at the end of that passage, it's the end of that chapter. The monologue ends the chapter. He says, George clings only to now. It is now that he must find another Jim, right? So he is hopeful about finding another boyfriend slash husband, um, having earlier in the book sort of despaired of being single forever. And then it continues, now that he must love, now that he must live. So it's suddenly optimistic, which I think is un-British
Yeah, that's right.
uh, and more American. So yes,
Yeah.
he's sort of ending the book until his heart attack
Well,
ends the
then,
book an American optimist.
yeah, but yeah, with a dire British ending. Yeah, that's a good observation. I didn't think of that one. What 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 I what I did think about as I was reading was, of course, what we have talked about in the past. My requirements, my conditions to write a classic LA novel. They were two, if you recall. One was everyone's from somewhere else, and the second one was, you remember it? Okay, everyone's playing a role, right? Hollywood.
Yeah,
And of course the three main characters in this novel are from somewhere else. George is from England, Charlie's from England. Charlie plays a role earlier on. She doesn't just come up in the last, in the last part of the novel. And of course, Jim's from Ohio, right? So we have all three of these main characters who are not Los Angelesians. Fulfills my first requirement, and the second requirement is everyone's playing a role. He talks about playing a role right from the get-go, where he's going into class, and there's this line of he says he's putting his psychological makeup on for this role he must play. And then for the next pages, he just talks about playing a role and this performative act of teaching. Maybe there's a section I can read, if you don't mind, again, Bruce,
Yeah.
which will help listeners to know what I'm driving at. So he goes, he's putting on his mask, he's walking across the parking lot, getting ready to face his audience. And as he gets out of his car, he feels an upsurge of energy, of eagerness for the play to begin. And he
Yeah.
walks eagerly with a springy step along the gravel path, past the music building toward the department office. He is all actor now. An actor on his way up from the dressing room, hastening through the backstage world of props and lamps and stagehands to make his entrance. A veteran, calm and assured. He pauses for a excuse me. Sorry. He pauses for a well-measured moment in the doorway of the office, and then boldly, clearly, with the subtly modulated British intonation which his public demands of him, speaks his opening line, "Good morning." And the three secretaries, each one of them a charming and accomplished actress in her own chosen style, recognized him instantly without even a flicker of doubt and replied, "Good morning" to him. He says in parentheses, there is something religious here, like responses in a church, a reaffirmation of faith in the basic American dogma that it is always a good morning. Good, despite the Russians and their rockets and all the ills and worries of the flesh. For of course we know, don't we, that the Russians and the worries are not really real. They can be unthought and made to vanish, and therefore the morning can be made to be good. Very well then, it is good. So he comes down on the side of this American happy, how you doing, good morning world. He comes down on that side. So okay, if they think they can do it, then maybe they can, and I'm with them on it. But we go on and on about this role he's playing. It reminded me of the Changing Places by Mr. Lodge, where he talks about this Morris Zapp character, this professor from Berkeley who goes to England, and he is completely performative in his lecture style, and it kind of blows the minds of the English students. It's like they're used to a more scholarly approach to the material, talking about Shakespeare, and it reminded me of that. And well, you see, he has taken on the American style, this British professor. He is assuming a role and wearing a mask, maybe even.
Yeah. So I was very captured by that passage too. I think I found it more ambivalent than you found it. So when I was reading it, it's very clear he's playing a role, and that's very Angelino. But he sort of takes it back. So he's his audience, which is the secretaries, they play the role he needs them to play. But then he inserts that criticism of the American dogma that it is always a good morning, good despite the Russians and their rockets and the ills and worries of the flesh. So that's what I mean by ambivalent. So even when he is playing the good American, he's sort of praising the optimism, the American optimism, or California sunniness of personality, but he takes it back. You see what I mean? He sort of takes it back.
Oh,
So there's um there's a superficiality which is another theme we discuss when we're talking about wars, the loved one. There's a superficiality in those Californians that they pretend it's a good morning, even when his his pessimistic British inner monologue is telling them that, but there's rockets in Cuba, and we could all die in nuclear war, and my flesh is decaying, and I am ill and worried about being single.
Yeah.
You see what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Well, he does take it back a little bit. You're absolutely right. I mean, there's another example where he does criticize point blank, not giving with one and taking away with the other. The American faith in technology, where he takes this IBM card to hand from the secretaries. It's the immediate passage following, and he goes off on a little diatribe about that one. And
Yeah.
again, he talks about the American colleges as being diploma factories, which they are. And there's this giant parking lot there at this college. He basically describes it as, a parking lot with a few buildings adjacent. you know, Not such a fan of the car culture in that moment.
That's
But
very
yeah, that
Southern
is
California.
Southern California. Yeah, I mean, when I was first starting to write fiction, and I was trying to write about my past in LA, the first image that ever always came to mind was me in my car. Right? It's like I'm going to be starting a story with me driving. That was my one most vital image that I had retained in Europe of LA. It's being in a car. So yeah, all that stuff. Yeah, he's ambivalent. That's what makes for a great novel. The ambivalence of the narrator toward this, that, and the other. And yeah, I agree with you. And yeah, there
Well,
you have it.
let's explore some of these themes about California and the foreigner in California. So, just on California, I thought there's a couple of things I wrote down is very interesting. The first one is that California, the first mention of California is on page 17 in my edition, and it's when he's sitting on the crapper. Right? Or he says in local language, he says, sitting on the John, he can look
Yeah,
out of the window. They can, parentheses, they can see his head and shoulders from across the street, but not what he is doing. It is a gray, lukewarm California winter morning. The sky is low and soft with Pacific fog. Down at the shore, ocean and sky will be one soft, sad gray. So the
yeah,
first mention of California is quite sad. It
yes,
contains the word sad. It's gray. He's not sunny. He's not sunny in his own mind at this point. He's
yeah,
got a lot of complaints, and he's when he looks out of his window at his neighbors, it's with negativity towards his neighbors. And
yeah,
California is not sunny at this moment. By the way, I kind of preferred the winters in California. I like those grey days where
yeah,
you'd have less tourists, and it was more sort of intimate, and
yeah,
you wouldn't be burnt up by the sun. So, but it's a sad grey day in his description, and he's sitting on the crapper. So that's
yeah,
that's the first association with California.
yeah,
And then if I may, there's this long description about the neighborhood he lives in, which we should get into because it's
yeah,
describing the theme of foreigners. So the people who populated this suburban development are Easterners, who he describes as having liked California when they shipped out to the Pacific theater of operations during the Second World War and decided that they would move from the East to California. And this is the suburb, the new development that they took over from those sort of hippie types.
yep,
And it changed and all that. It, so it really struck me that that was the theme of foreigners. Everybody is not from there.
yeah,
And interestingly, there's a sort of clash of cultures going on in the 1940s, the late 1940s, between what does he call them? The pioneer escapists from
mm-hmm,
dingy downtown Los Angeles and stuffy, snobbish Pasadena. They
yep,
founded this colony back in the early 20s. Blah 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 blah. Their utopian dream was a subtropical English village with Montmartre manners. So they were sort of European oriented
yeah,
Los Angelinos, and then these Easterners come in who are more commercial and they're described as tacky and cheerful and defiantly bohemian.
Yeah,
Did
yeah.
that ring true to
It's
you?
Well, it rings true to the character very much so, because he is uh, by virtue of being a homosexual, he's on the margins of society. So of course he's going to deplore the uh, the decline of this bohemian neighborhood that he had never inhabited himself, it doesn't sound like, but he's sort of yearning for it's a nostalgic yearning for the past. This guy who wants to live in the LA now, kind of ironic in that respect. But it doesn't surprise me that this should be commented on, because as we talked about last time, that was the great demographic fact of LA ever since at least 1913, when they had the water from the Owens Valley, so they were able to expand and attract more people. And from that year until 1950, you went from about 300,000 to 2 million. So the great fact of LA, at least on a demographic level, was people pouring in, people pouring in and displacing others. And so that, yeah, that's also a hallmark of an LA novel, commenting on that fact of all these people, be they from Iowa, Ohio, or England, moving in.
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of interesting things there. So one thing that strikes me is that George is a foreigner amongst foreigners in the sense that they're all immigrants into California, but he's still more foreign than his neighbors. One of the foreignness aspects of foreignness is his homosexuality, uh, which is not foreignness by nationality, but he is an outsider amongst outsiders. I thought that was an interesting
Yeah,
uh, written nuance. And
indeed.
then the second thing, you mentioned the theme in of change, and he actually describes the change with a capital C. I don't know if you remember that. So the change began in the late 40s when the World War II vets came swarming out of the East with their just married wives.
Yep.
So there are waves of immigrants into California, and and each wave is different to the last. So everybody's foreign to California, and
Yeah.
they're not becoming nobody's becoming Californians. They're just sort of bringing their own changes, their own
Yeah.
aspirations, and imposing it on California, which is um, kind of different now, where you got sort of a politically you got a politically correct uh, social justice narrative about nativism,
Right.
where it's stolen land, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Of course.
it, and so who is really California now? You
Right.
unless you unless you're Native American or perhaps Mexican, you're you're foreign.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. That's the fact of Southern California and Los Angeles more specifically, that it's a work in progress. It's not that someone comes to Los Angeles and becomes an Angelino. What does that mean? You yourself are bringing a certain character to the city, and then when a certain amount of people achieve a critical mass, maybe that turns uh, gives LA a certain personality. But Raymond Chandler himself said, Philip Marlowe, LA, his setting, that was his bread and butter, the LA milieu. He, in one of his novels, he says LA has the personality of a paper cup. It's disposable. It changes from one decade to the next. What is this personality? What is this character we're talking about? It's very it's very mercurial. It's very evanescent. And I know there's this great line by Charlie, when they're having their drinks late night. They're getting a little sloppy, talking about home, what is home, and all the rest. And she finally decides she wants to go home, right? It must be said that Charlie is actually a war bride.
Yeah.
She married. She was one of these people coming to L.A. after the Second World War that you talked about, but she wasn't coming from the East. She was coming from across the ocean with this, kind of hunky American guy. That marriage fell apart, of course, but she stayed in LA. And so she says at one point, I want to go back. She's much younger than George, who's 58. She's 45, I think it is said in the novel. And so she wants to go back to her sister, who they don't even have a good relationship. But it's home, it's my past. And then she says, I shall know where I am. Which
Yeah.
actually, I find that sort of poignant, because most people in LA, they don't know where they are. They're lost. They're lost souls. It's just the nature of the city. And so I thought there was a ring of truth in that line that really struck me. Charlie,
Yeah. I
I
mean,
shall know
in
where
a
I
sense,
am.
yeah. Well, I mean, in a sense, she's still lost, isn't she? Because she's not settled enough in Los Angeles to be certain that she wants to stay. And George has somewhat of the same dilemma, but as you said earlier, he eventually resolves that by saying, "No, the future is in Los Angeles for me." So, I mean, it's unsettled. The whole novel is very unsettled and
Yeah,
unsettling.
there's a sense of
No, but
displacement throughout.
yeah,
No one is putting down roots really, but maybe that's the nature of LA. Yeah, it's just the
yeah,
city
and
itself.
sorry, and relatedly, people are um, searching for a role, perhaps, that relates to the role playing that you mentioned earlier. They're sort of searching for their place. They're not unlike perhaps in their places of origin, like in a traditional British novel. The characters would be very well defined by their geography and their
Yeah,
class and their education, their breeding. You don't really get that. So if everybody's playing a role and they've all moved into this state, and the state is quite young anyway, and the state is defined by its immigrants rather than its nativists, there isn't a strong nativist culture. People are remaking California, and they are, in fact, making it up, right? So they're what's that? Fake it till you make it.
yeah,
That's the culture, and playing a role. It's very unsettled. It's unsettling. I think that's this novel is really speaking to a what's the right word? It's speaking to a dilemma about the California dream, that inherently, if you can go there to remake yourself or be someone new, you're you're not being yourself, or you're not you're no longer grounded, which is kind of ironic because Californians, as you know, are always talking about, I want to be grounded. I came to California to get grounded, and yet they're the stereotypical Californian is also very flaky
of
and
course.
uh, trying to find themselves.
That's right.
So yeah, yeah, I think this novel, 1962, he's picking up on. This is
Yeah.
really just at the beginning of the hippie era, and California was the center of that, and it sucked in immigrants who wanted to discover the
Mhm.
what was tune in and drop out,
That's
hang
right.
out, get high,
Right.
which is the epitome of this discovering yourself in an ultimately vacuous way.
Yes. Well said. I couldn't have said it better as a native Angelino. The the fun of it is though that uh, some people enjoy that, and it seems to me that George does finally enjoy it. So you see what I'm saying? I'm doing. I'm kind of putting George. He's more of an Angelino than maybe he even knows. Uh, and there's this great outburst he has when Charlie does in fact come down the side of, oh, I think I'm going to go home. And Charlie says, uh, when she's talking about England and going home, oh, I know I'll find it all changed. I know there'll be a lot of things I'll hate. I know I'll miss all these supermarkets. Shall be miserable living with Nan. Nan is her sister, whom she doesn't really like, nor does Nan like her. I can't help any of that. At least when I'm there, I shall know where I am. And then George says, never in my born days have I heard such utter drooling masochism. And she says, oh, yes, I know it sounds like that, and perhaps it is. Do you suppose masochism's our way of being patriotic? Or do I mean that the other way around? What fun, darling. Shouldn't we have another tiny drink? Let's drink to the masochism of old England. That gave me some pause. I was thinking about that. But I should maybe throw the question to you as a Brit who has lived in California for much of his life. And is there a certain masochistic streak to Brits who want to go back home? At this
No,
point,
I think
probably.
I think there's a masochistic streak in Britain's uh, at home in Britain. So it's
Yeah,
part of the culture to assume the worst but make fun of it, to assume the worst but to make light of it. But the sort of endless self-criticism and uh, commentary on how Britain is not up to it, comes across to Americans, particularly Californians, as pessimistic, negative, unambitious. Uh, but yes, there is a masochistic streak, certainly in Britain. So when she was saying that, I was thinking it's sort of a one manifestation of her nostalgia that she's looking for something. Is it Britain? And if being British again means being masochistic, re-embracing my masochistic culture,
yeah,
then I'm all for
that's right.
it
And
because
and
that's what it
but
means to be British.
that's right. Yeah, but George isn't. See, that's the thing. George is not going
Yeah,
there. He's a hedonist, if anything. If we're going to, choose between the two, masochist or hedonist, and he likes the lifestyle he has here in LA too much to even go back home to feel grounded. He's not going to do it.
yeah. I mean, think there's a gendered aspect to their contest or dispute. Is that at one point, I can't remember where it is. At one point, she says it's different for women. Is it so? I think she says it a couple of times. So she says when
Yeah,
to be single, it's different for women. We need to be in a relationship. This is when she's trying to persuade him to get into a relationship with her, and it's harder for women. And I think when she's being nostalgic, she also says she's saying that it matters more for a woman to have roots than
yeah,
maybe for you, a man. Um, but I mean, her when she is being gendered, it's a little off the mark because he is really a homosexual man, and she's projecting onto him an idealized heterosexual version of George, which is not realistic. So, um, that is part of what alienates him. So he's. I think there's two things going on when he's reacting to her. I think he is
right.
contrary. So when she says something, his natural instinct is to contradict her. So she will say, don't you think about going back to Britain? How wonderful it would be. His instinct is to say, "Oh God, no, it's so dreary." Da, da, da.
Yeah, yeah,
And then, if she were to say, we should stay in California and continue on as we are, he'd be like, well, California doesn't have what England had with my nanny and the
yeah,
Moors and all the rest of it. So I think that's one aspect to it. He is contrary, not just with Charlie, but with all sorts of people. And then in a more vicious way, he is manipulative. So this thing with Charlie, uh remember he's in her home only because he makes a last minute decision to accept her invitation. 'Cause it's
Hmm.
early in the book, she calls him up. He was on the John, right?
On the John, he waddles over with his pants down at his ankles and
That's
takes the
right.
phone, and it puts him in a rotten mood from the beginning. And he says, "No, Charlie, I
Yeah.
have no time. I got to go teach my class. Bye."
Yeah. Charlotte has a positively clairvoyant knack of picking the wrong moment to call.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of great lines like that throughout the novel. We have to tell people. I mean, there's a lot of witty
Yeah.
one-liners. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so she is calling because she kind of needs him, and he can tell from her tone that, she's upset, and but he resents the fact that she won't come out and say it. But and in fact, that gets to the Britishness. So there's British reserve in her wanting her help, his help, wanting his help, but not being able to express it. Whereas a Californian would say, "Oh my God, I need somebody to talk to.
I'm
Oh my God, you got to
dying
come
here.
over. You got to
Yeah,
come over
right.
right now. I'm gonna die."
I'm gonna call
Yeah.
911. Yeah.
And she says, "Would you possibly be free tonight?" And his inner monologue is saying, "I know what she wants. She
Yeah.
instead of coming out and saying it, she wants me to invite myself, and I'm not going to do it." And then he goes out and he has he has his uh visit to the college and the store, and he has a he has an evening that he needs to fill pretty much, and then he calls
Yeah.
Charlotte up, and I think he has a few drinks to get there,
Oh yeah.
and he calls
Yeah.
Charlotte up and says, "But can I still come over?" So that's what I
Hmm.
mean by he's kind of manipulative, kind of takes her for
Yeah.
granted, and he's kind of friendless. Like he's not
Yeah.
really friends with his neighbors because there is a point where one of his neighbors says, "Would you like to come over for a party?" And he says, "Oh no,
Yeah.
I don't think I can. I've got somebody coming over or something." And he makes up an excuse. So he's not really got any friends, and Charlotte is his sort of weak, um, controllable friend. So it's kind
Yeah.
of it's kind of vicious. It's not really a virtuous
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah. She's definitely faute de mieux, as the French say. She's the next best thing. Okay, guess I'll go over for a few drinks. What else am I going to do? And but what am I saying? But for yeah, I still I understand what you're saying. How he's ambivalent. He's very critical of the Angelinos and everything else. And I'm the last one not to be critical of my hometown and my fellow citizens, or at least my ex fellow citizens. But I really got the strong feeling that he is actually, coming down on the side of California if we have to. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm an American. See, I'm not being British about it. I'm trying to figure out where to put this guy. Right. And so he seems like he really is. He's become more Los Angelized than he thinks, or more Americanized, or more Californiaized. There's an example where he has this little discussion with this fellow who is getting a master's. I don't know. He can't get a PhD at Cal State LA, or whatever college he's teaching at, but he's really big into making a career in English literature. And his name is Russ Dreyer, and he's an ex-Marine, right? And
Mm.
he talks about how he and some fellow student of his fellow student. They're having a big discussion some night about Finnegan's Wake, right? And they can't resolve the discussion, so they go out in the backyard and have a few beers, and then they resolve it by having a pull-up contest, right? And George likes this. He says it reminds him of classical Greece, right? And then he says the line. He says, Russ's European counterpart would be a rather dry and brittle stick. So he likes this kind of complete man that U.S. colleges, with sports being a big emphasis and whatnot, that they can produce, right? So he's not into the scrawny little intellectual type. He likes these guys who are well-rounded men who can talk Finnegan's Wake and go out in the backyard, have a few beers, and do 13 pull-ups. That's the kind of guy he likes, and that's very much on the American model, right? As opposed to the traditional European model, right? Okay, I know you guys got rugby and cricket and crew and the whole thing. You produce the same type of fellow, I suppose, but uh, that's the contrast that he himself is drawing, right? And he's applauding the one and ooh for the other.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very good, Kevin. I hadn't thought about that much. So I think there's two uh there's two sort of counter-normative identities that he is that appeal to him in this novel. So the first in amongst the Californians, he is repelled by the Easterners who colonized his area, his suburban part of Los Angeles. And I think he identifies with those Bohemians that
Yeah, definitely.
established the colony in the 1920s in the first
Yep.
place. So he doesn't like his neighbors because they are sort of more uh, all American, heterosexual, family oriented, um, and their kids are brats who trample on flowers and come and knock on his door to get his angry reaction. Um, so he's identifying with a lost Californian uh, demographic of the 1920s, the tacky, cheerful, defiantly bohemian, um, and he doesn't identify with his with the new demographic that's come in, and then so that's that adds to the foreignness or the alienation of George in California, and then in academia he role plays the intellectual, but he is attracted to the tennis players and young Kenny who wants to go skinny dipping and is has this sort of uh, uh, irreverent, smiling, enigmatic quality to him. Whereas in class, George is trying to pin them down. He doesn't like he doesn't like like them being enigmatic in discussion of the literature. He wants to pin them down um, to an interpretation of the
Mm.
literature, what you actually read. So he's he's sort of an alienated academic as well as a an alienated Californian, or also he's in he's in a minority in all of these situations. So he's a sexual minority, he's a national minority, he's a uh, bohemian minority in this very in a suburbia that regards him as queer, to use the word the author himself uses, and he's an academic who would rather hang around with young people and go to the gym, which isn't particularly academic,
No.
and go to bars and even go skinny dip in the middle of the night, which is not very academic. So
Uh,
there's that theme.
yeah.
Let me get your comment on that.
I agree with you that you've really brought it out, particularly that bohemian aspect, which I didn't think much about. But he is a liminal element in the society, and particularly as an intellectual. You mentioned the academic in a very unintellectual America, right? I think today that's we're an unintellectual people. So just by virtue of his job, he's on the outside of mainstream society. So yeah, it's definitely a book written uh, by someone who occupied all those marginal roles himself, Mr. Christopher Isherwood, and and that's probably why, as I said earlier, I had this feeling throughout of just one of displacement. This guy is never at home anywhere he goes, even when he's at home, because he's surrounded by all this uh, middle class heterosexual culture. And I liked it. I enjoyed it. I like books by outsiders. I enjoy those.
Yeah, but can we talk about academia some more? Because
Please.
Again, this is a theme that you and I have discussed before. So both of us have written novels that satirize academia or feature protagonists who are academics in an academia which is not particularly virtuous. And the Isherwood's take on academia here is it's academia is kind of it's a bit of a fake. You know, as you mentioned earlier, it's a factory. He describes it as a factory. Um, it's a page 47 in my edition. The male and female raw material, which is fed daily into this factory along the
Yeah,
conveyor belts of the freeways to be
yeah,
processed, packaged, and placed on the market. So they are
great.
then like meat. That speaks to the fakery of universities now, where they are sort of they're selling something. People are starting to realize it that universities are selling a credential which, if you scratch the surface, doesn't have the value that it normally is being marketed as. And so I was quite struck for 1962.
Yeah,
He's quite cynical about academia, even though it's a state college. So
right.
it should be a more practically professionally oriented college than the Ivies and the big traditional universities, which are oriented to the humanities and the arts and all that sort of stuff. Um, then there's even though he is looking at academia from a sort of objective outside point of view, that he's not enamored with this academia thing. At the same time, he's not a very good academic, in my view. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I didn't. Where I got really uncomfortable with George was where he is objectifying his students and he's confronting his students, and some of his monologues about literature are really really stupid. Like one of the monologues is linking back to the Cuban Missile Crisis type
Yeah,
of the day, and what you people don't care about this sort of thing. And then the confrontation thing is quite explicit, uh, where he starts out his class. So he has a mode of starting the class where I'll quote it. So this is page
yeah,
57 of my edition. Slowly, deliberately, like a magician. Again, this is role playing again, isn't it?
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
like a magician, he could have said like an actor on the stage. He said, but he's like a magician, but he's like something. He's pretending to be something. He takes a single book out of his briefcase and places it on the reading desk. As he does this, his eyes move over the faces of the class. His lips curve in a faint but bold smile. Some of them smile back at him. George finds this frank confrontation, there's that word,
yeah, yeah,
extraordinarily exhilarating. He draws strength from the smiles, blah blah blah, and so he continues to sit there silently until they all quieten down and look at him, and then he launches his monologue. And I found this very childish.
I did
I
too.
thought at the
Yeah,
age of 58, but it
yes,
sounds like he's been teaching for a while. He should have snapped out of this much earlier.
yeah,
And as a student, I'd be really pissed off with this sort of thing. I think this guy's a joker.
yeah,
It's all about him. It's egotistical. He's not
yeah,
going to be a good teacher. And both you and I must know plenty of academics like that. They're so egotistical. It's all about the
yeah,
performance instead of the content. And then, added in with his objectification of his students and going for a drink with students. And in Kenny's case, they go skinny dipping. He's one of his students. Come
yeah.
on, control yourself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I had the same reaction when I read that bit about not saying a word and waiting for the class to quiet down. He describes it as being 3 or 4 minutes. That's an eternity.
Yes.
That's an eternity just sitting there with this little Cheshire cat grin. Yeah, how childish. I mean, really, yeah. But yeah, Isherwood felt he had to write that bit, and maybe he's trying to show that this guy is, kind of a juvenile at heart. He certainly behaves that way. Yes, I mean, if you go naked into the water with a student of yours with the intent of perhaps getting him back up to your apartment, which he does, but nothing happens. Whew, playing it kind of fast and loose there, buddy.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, there's another inner monologue in that classroom scene which I found interesting. This is about race. So
Mm-hmm.
he is objectifying some of his young male students, and then he's stereotyping some of the races. One of the most interesting is where he is conflicted about his feelings. He's got sort of these progressive liberal feelings about Estelle, who is described as a Negro student, quite contemporary language, and yet he resents the feelings he has because she is a Negro. So he's trying to make allowance for her, and then he resents that. So I'll just read it because it's
Yeah.
so you get the authenticity of it. So Estelle is one of his brightest students. Just because she is bright, she is more conscious of being a Negro, apparently, than the other colored students in the class are. In fact, she is hypersensitive. George suspects her of suspecting him of all kinds of subtle discrimination. Probably she wasn't in the room when he told them to read the novel. Damn, he should have noticed that and told her later. Which is what woke people today would call white savior syndrome, right?
Exactly right.
He should have
You're making,
noticed
yeah, yeah,
noticed that she wasn't in the room and she needed
that she was
his
playing
help.
hooky. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the next sentence is he is a bit intimidated by her. Also, he likes her and is sorry, which again is a white savior complex. He's
Yeah.
sorry for her, presumably because she's a Negro in the language of the time. Next
Right.
sentence, also, he resents the way she makes him feel.
Which is probably a perfect encapsulation of the way that the white saviors feel, right?
Yeah,
They probably feel a
yeah,
little bit of resentment too. You're foisting this job on me. Damn it! I hope you're grateful, which they're
yeah,
not.
yeah.
Yeah, in most cases. Yeah, I thought, it has a certain brilliance about it. I mean, right, describing who this guy is.
I,
He's
I think that
a,
was one of the funniest parts of the novel for me because it's
yeah,
written in a very poetical, naturalistic way, which is it's kind of tongue in cheek. It's satire really because it exaggerates his thoughts. It exaggerates a progressive liberal's inner thoughts. It's a critical commentary, um, but it's funny, uh,
indeed.
and, and it's sort of a satire of the academic while he's clearly not that enamored with being an academic. It was quite it brought a lot together for me in that
Yeah.
paragraph.
And in the start of your little passage where he's feeling like a magician and everything, and he feels, just continuing on with it, if I may, he feels brilliant, vital, challenging, slightly mysterious, and above all, now note the words, above all, foreign. Now, I found this interesting, not only because I knew you and I would be talking about the novel, but again, the expat who is perceived by others first and foremost as not one of them, right?
Yeah,
Because I live this here in Berlin as an American.
yeah,
I'm certain you live that to a large degree in America, at least until you open, no later than when you open up your mouth and they hear the accent,
yeah,
right? And what I noticed is how they how Isherwood talks about how George kind of likes being British. I mean, he enjoys the distinction, and he uses it for his own purposes too. Right? There's a line where it says George has license to play the British eccentric. He can afford to say pretty much anything he likes on campus, right? Because he's a Brit. Oh, what the hell? He's one of these eccentric Brits. So he gets away with murder in this lecture with this long diatribe that you found to be objectionable, and which I didn't find to be, very praiseworthy either. But he gets away with it because he's a Brit. And and Isherwood also talks how Charlie again, she, in of all places, L.A., she has never learned to drive. It's like amazing. She's like some kind of freak show. And
Yeah.
and Isherwood says that Charlotte still, she has neighbors utterly intimidated and bewitched by her Britishness, which George himself knows so well how to employ. So come clean, basically. It's a personal question, George. um, it's a personal question, Bruce. Come on, you exploit that Britishness, right? You exploit that British accent to your own advantage when need be, right? I hope you do.
Well, to be honest, I try to hide it most of the time because I just don't want to get into another conversation about where am I from and oh,
Yeah,
I love your accent, or you know it's terrible what's happening in Britain over there right now, and
yeah.
um, or or worse, there could be you could run into somebody who just hates British people for whatever reason, and that does happen. So frankly, I try to hide it, and also I think in the classroom, to be honest, um, I always felt that being British was a net negative because whatever I said, I could be dismissed as just being foreign, not having an American experience. So I would talk about American politics, American foreign policy, and I even though I am American, uh, I could be dismissed by my students as not what would he know about what would this Brit know about American politics, etc.
And if I may, Bruce, because this is very pertinent to what you're saying, in the classroom, George is observing all the students as you yourself have observed. And this Russ Dreyer, this ex-Marine with the 13 pull-ups and Finnegan's Wake, he's there, he's sitting there. And George thinks to himself, uh, Dreyer isn't really impressed by him. To Dreyer, George will always remain an academic amateur. His degrees and background are British and therefore dubious. So that's exactly what you're talking about. Like a certain American, like
Yeah,
this Marine guy with a lot of confidence and stuff. It's like, yeah, come on, yeah, show me what you got,
yeah,
Mister Brit. Right. So there's a certain element that's not impressed. But
yeah.
I mean, but by and large, the people are, you got a certain cultural cachet that goes along with that accent. And Americans, we're an unintellectual, uncultivated people, and we tend to be impressed by it rather than the opposite.
Well,
And particularly in
we
Los
probably
Angeles, where we have
yeah,
no roots. And at least you have roots. You have the British Empire behind you, for God's sake. We have nothing. We
yeah.
just came out from Ohio. What do we know?
Well, probably you are correct that normatively there's more of a positive reception than negative. But there are problems in academia, as you know, with just having a foreign degree. It doesn't really matter if it's British. So there are some universities that demand proof of what they call academic equivalency, where you have to
Mm,
prove that the United States government has rated your particular institution, which awarded your degrees, as equivalent to American universities. And
yes.
that is always true when you do any work with the United States government itself. You have to prove academic equivalency. So there is a presumption of inferiority with foreign
That's right. Yeah.
institutions in general, and some students will presume not just that you are ignorant of the American experience, so cannot speak to the American anything, that they secondly may assume that you are inferior, your training is inferior because it's foreign. So you never know, and I've generally tried to avoid being foreign, although at some point it's inescapable. I think for George, he when he's talking about being foreign, he's socially foreign too. So he actually uses go back to that page you're on. He talks about being alien. Oh, that's here it is. So 57 on my in my edition. He feels, as you read it, he feels brilliant, vital, challenging, slightly mysterious, and above all foreign. And then he talks about his clothing. His dark clothes, his white dress shirt and tie, are uncompromisingly alien from the aggressively virile informality of the young male students.
Hmm.
So he is socially alienated from his students, which is interesting because he tries to befriend them, and I think he steps over the line, even when it's not a sexual line. So he oversteps the line with Kenny sexually, but he is also overstepping the line when he's making, well, such as with Estelle, he's
Right.
thinking he's got to give her special privileges,
Right.
and just to complete that thought, he has he stereotypes some of his students too, right? Don't forget, Lois Yamaguchi smiles at George in a way that makes him wonder if she and Kenny have private jokes about him. But who can be sure of anything with these enigmatic Asians? Question mark.
Yeah.
When is that
I'm
in a
surprised.
future edition? Surely that's going to be censored in a future edition as being problematic.
I'm surprised it isn't already. Yeah. Even I sort of, sat up when I read that one. These enigmatic Asians, Uh, yeah, yeah, he does a bit of that. But he also does it in a non-racial way. This Miss Netta Torres, for example, this poor woman. He says, Miss Netta, this is a woman who asks him a few questions after the course,
Yes,
right? And he's just very dismissive of her. Uh,
yes,
Mrs. Netta Torres is also middle-aged. She seems to be taking this course out of mere curiosity or to fill in idle hours. Why else would you take a course if you're 40 years old, for Christ's sake? I mean, come on. Yeah, you're curious. You want something to do. You want to keep your mind active. I thought he was brutal on her. She has the look of a divorcee. She sits up front
yeah,
because her interest is centered frankly and brutally on George as George. So he's a peacock. He thinks that everyone's focused on him. She watches rather than listens to him. She even seems to be reading his words. Oh, and then he just dismisses her at the end of the class when she has a couple very reasonable questions, and he goes back to his office, his dressing room, as it were, and
yes,
hides. So
yes.
he's rough on all of them, not just maybe Mrs. Torres is Hispanic. I don't know. So we can complete go through the whole racial spectrum from black to Asian to Hispanic here in terms of his denigrating remarks, based maybe even a little bit in the Torres case on her being Hispanic. Who knows? But
Yeah,
he's a brutal cynic.
I think it's also that she's a woman. So we haven't discussed this yet,
Right.
but I
Right.
think George he prefers the company of men, and he is quite contemptuous of women. There's a couple of examples of that. So Netta Torres is one. There's also on the other page, opposing page, there's Sister Maria, he's contemptuous of her
Oh,
reasons for
right.
being
Yeah,
their,
yeah.
this bride of Christ,
Right.
um, he fought soldier of heaven, and he faces the soldier of heaven across the front line of an exceedingly polite Cold War. In every sentence he addresses to her, he calls her sister, which is probably just what she doesn't want. So so there's another female role, the nun, that
Mm-hmm.
George clearly doesn't like. And then earlier, there's a bit of sexism. So there's a bit of racial stereotyping, and then there's a bit of sexism. So in general, my point was just that there are no women he really enjoys the company of. The housewives, remember, are portrayed very negatively as
Yeah.
being bad parents. They're bad mothers. They're, and also they're fake liberals. So when a husband describes George as queer in this imaginary scenario which George is painting for the reader, based on his knowledge of his neighbors. The wife jumps in and says, "Oh, no, 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 no! I've read some popular psychology which says there's nothing queer about them. That's just the way they are." And pats herself on the back, which she's so tolerant. And yet
Yeah.
George is portraying her as just ignorant and just a progressive liberal who thinks she's informed when she's really not doing him any favors.
Right.
So, housewives, nuns, female students. Remember, Lois, Kenny's girlfriend, is just a
Right.
whore.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
she's
right.
she's seduced she's seduced Kenny, who George has a homosexual interest in, and so
Yeah.
she is effectively a rival. And then, so just my final observation on the sexism, we go back to when he's driving on the freeways to his college.
Right.
He never getting rattled when a crazy teenager hangs onto his tail, the tail of his car, or a woman, parenthesis, it all comes of letting them go first through doorways, cuts in sharply ahead of him.
I forgot. That's a good one. That's a good line. I like that actually. Yeah. And he has these sadistic fantasies as
Oh,
well.
God, yes, we
Not
should get to that. That's
Yeah,
awful.
yeah, he
As a
fancies himself
terrorist.
Uncle George, who
Yeah,
will who will send out killing parties to
yeah,
dispatch all his enemies and torture them, of course, quite a while before they finally do away with them. There's like a line here. He says, talking about the wife. So we're getting back to the misogyny a little bit. His
yeah.
wife may be kidnapped. This is the wife of some politician or something that has it out for homosexuals or something like that. I forget exactly. His wife may
Yeah,
be
it was a
kidnapped.
senator. It was a
The
senator who was
senator,
organizing a campaign against sex deviates,
sex deviants,
language of
right?
the novel itself.
That's right. And George in this persona of Uncle George, to wreak havoc on these people, the senator and his followers. He says his wife may be kidnapped, garroted, embalmed, and seated in the living room to await his return from the office. His children's heads may arrive in cartons by mail, or tapes of the screams his relatives utter as they are tortured to death. I mean, there is definitely more than a little sociopathic streak in George. I mean,
Yes.
yeah, it's coming
And
out
what's
now. Yeah,
Yeah, and also in that passage, he fantasizes about torturing the campaigners against homosexuality with hot pokers and pincers, and
yeah,
then they would perform every possible sexual act on camera before the film is distributed to the public to
yeah,
embarrass them. And he describes this as a campaign of systematic terror. Phew,
yeah.
it's if it's an insight into Isherwood's own imagination,
Ooh,
uh,
yeah.
you know, who would want to spend much time inside Isherwood's head? What's interesting about George's fantasies of terrible crimes like that on another page, which actually comes earlier, it's a few pages earlier, so it's page 33 in my edition. He describes himself as having an acute criminal complex, by which he means he has that he's innocent. He feels guilty when he's innocent.
Ah,
George is
mhm.
hyper conscious of all bylaws, city ordinances, rules, petty regulations. Um, he worries that at some point he'll be figured out that he's not really the person he is. That also speaks to that complex, the other complex, which is not explicit in the book, but we call it imposter syndrome, right? And that
Mhm.
that actually might speak to his role playing, that he's not
Yeah,
really. He's certainly not the young man that he used to be. He's not maybe not the confident professor that he portrays himself as. He's an imposter. So
yeah,
he has a criminal complex and some imposter syndrome. and he's using that psychological makeup that you mentioned earlier to hide these things. But he's not. His mind is not just struggling with insecurities. His mind is also struggling with terrible, vengeful, tortuous
Yeah,
fantasies about
yeah,
taking on his enemies.
yeah. I mean, from the standpoint of not liking women too much. I mean, he leaves no one unscathed. He can't even leave the poor little nun alone, you know. Uh,
Yeah,
but it might go a little bit back, and this within the parameters of the story itself, leaving Isherwood and everything else aside. In the story, he visits this dying affair of Jim, right? This woman who had this affair with Jim, which was very traumatic for the relationship and for George. And he goes there, and you're wondering why, but I think it's this certain sadistic streak in him. He wants to see her suffering.
yeah,
He pretends sympathy for her plight, not only in his interaction with her, his in real terms, but also in his thoughts that are shared with the reader. But I'm not so sure now. It seems like there might be a sadistic uh, bent here that compels him to visit
yeah,
the deathbed of this woman. She's shrunken, you know, she's no longer the apparently rather attractive woman she was when she had this affair with Jim. So he's taking a sort of malicious satisfaction, it seems to me, in seeing her downfall.
yeah.
And that
I
would
think that's quite clear.
and yes, and but that in turn would inform his mistrust and dislike of the women that he encounters in the novel.
Yeah, so heterosexual women can steal a bisexual boyfriend. That is a threat, certainly.
Right.
Um,
So
some of the
so
other
he's not going to cut them any slack.
No, I mean, you would think that he would not be threatened by faithful wives, but interestingly, there aren't any clear faithful wives. So I remembered in this early chapter where he is describing his neighbors, and it's all negative. Like the kids are horrible, the fathers are pretenders, and the wives are bad mothers, and um, they're lazy, and they pretend to be good liberals when they're actually quite ignorant. You know, this is a general stereotyping of the suburban housewife of the 1950s, which is carried into 1962 apparently here. Now there's a key passage where the heterosexual housewife, the married housewife, even if she's heterosexual and doesn't have designs on Jim, George's boyfriend, this is on page 26. This is the page where he's describing parties. Every weekend there are parties. The teenagers are encouraged to go off and dance and pet with each other, even if they haven't finished their homework. So again, they're bad parents,
Yeah.
right? And then continuing the sentence, for the grown-ups need desperately to relax unobserved, dot, dot, dot. And now, 3 hours later, after the cocktails and the guffaws, the quite astonishingly dirty stories, the more or less concealed pinching of other wives' fannies, the
Yeah.
steaks and the pie, while the girls, as Mrs. Strunk and the rest will continue to call themselves and each other if they live to be 90, are washing up. Mr. Strunk and Mr. Garfine are proud of their kingdom. So there are gender roles here, which he is commenting on negatively, and he doesn't trust the fidelity of these marriages.
Hmm.
So it's very cynical and probably quite heterophobic, I might say.
There you go. Yeah. It seems to be the case, doesn't it? But his phobias are without end. Actually, it seems now that we're enumerating them, it didn't occur to me when I first read it, but now that you're bringing them out, yes. And I'm just wondering how representative of your basic homosexual in the early '60s in LA George's views are, or if they're just particular to George because he's in a real vulnerable situation. Yeah, his life partner has died, and he's not at the top of his game really. So I'm just wondering how emblematic all this is for that community, as we call them back then, the gay community, or whether this is just a real cantankerous son of a gun, this George.
Yeah.
It's just a thought of mine. There's no need to comment on it. I was thinking that though, was there really such great antipathy that homosexuals at that time had for the heterosexual world surrounding them, and did that occur because they felt that antipathy from the that heterosexual world itself? So it was just a reaction to that, or was there a certain superiority complex that went along with it, which it seems to be in the case of George?
Or it's at least indifference towards women. There's sometimes suspicion of women by George and contempt. There's some contempt for certain women, like the nun and these housewives, certainly. So it's not. I don't think there are any positive women characters in this
But
novel. Correct me
only
if I'm wrong.
only Charlie, but in a very pathetic way.
Yeah, she's a pathetic woman. Yeah, she's a spurned wife, right? Her husband left her. It's not
Yeah,
even that they um divorced or she left him or anything. Her husband
and it has
left her alone
yeah, and it has to
for
be
another
said that
woman.
she for another woman, right? So that's what George and Charlie have in common. And
It's true.
what they don't have in common, however, is that Charlie has a son uh, by this marriage in America, and she is still considering leaving her son. I mean, that's not something that most mothers can bring themselves to do, in my experience. It's everything for the child, and even if you're going to suffer, but she wants to go back to suffer in her own way and marry old England while the son remains. So there must be some real emotional uh, uh, conflicts going on in her, uh, and she might share that as well with George. They probably have more in common than we thought at the beginning, not just their
Yeah,
Britishness.
that's true. I mean, my sense of her son, I think her son's name was Frank. So she's complaining about her son's room being empty, and should she rent it out, might her son come home? So I think there's her son has left her as well. She wanted
Right.
her son to stay, I don't know, go to college locally or whatever it was. It's there's the backstory is not fully explained, but clearly her son has left her and she feels abandoned and maybe um, given the circumstances, she feels free to abandon her son, maybe in a sort of somewhat spiteful, vengeful way. Um, but certainly she is not a happy single woman, and she is fixated on George, which again speaks to her patheticness because she knows that he is homosexual.
Yeah.
And and just for all you viewers out there who have seen the movie, and in the movie, George says to Jim that he slept with Charlie when they were both in London. That is not in the novel. They have
Yeah.
not slept together. It is very clear in the novel that he is not romantically or sexually interested in her. He keeps rejecting her. And I think that his rejections of her are somewhat gameful, that he actually takes some pleasure in
Yeah.
going back to reject her.
That's right. Uh, there are some parts in that late night drinking session where it's made very clear that he's almost physically repulsed by her.
Mm.
And I'm sort of paging through to see if I can't find anything as an example. I can't offhand, but yes, he's not only uh, scornful of her and her attraction for him. He plays with it, but he's just, he's put off by her uh, on a physical level too, and not and going beyond what a homosexual man might not quite feel for a woman. It goes beyond that. At least that was my reading of it. So yes, some friend, huh?
Yeah,
Some friend, that George.
yeah, and his contrariness is quite acute with her, where he seems to be more deliberately trying to contradict her than he was with the other characters in the book. Um,
Right.
can
And when
we?
he
Can
leaves,
we?
he, yeah.
No, sorry, no, no. Go
I just
ahead.
want, and when he leaves, he terms it an escape, right? But this
Yes.
time he has escaped, right? But he puts himself in the line of fire, sitting up all night with the poor woman. She's lonely. He knows what's on her mind. They're on their 13th, 14th, 15th, scotch or whatever it is. She's going to get moony, and he knows exactly what he's doing. And then when he comes down the hill from her place, there's like he gets a shot of adrenaline. He heads off to the bar, right? It's like he just brushes her off,
Yeah.
She in fact she asks him to stay the night, just sleep, accompany her, and we know nothing's going to happen, or we probably think nothing's going to happen. She doesn't pretend that she's going to crawl into bed with him, but no, he's just he treats her rather callously. In fact, I felt sorry for her, to tell you the truth, and
Yeah.
I think she's a rather, I will use the term poignant as opposed to pathetic, a rather poignant character, because it seems she's trying. She fell in love with this hunk of a GI after the war. What's she gonna do? She's gonna follow the guy home. Didn't work out. She's got her son who is alienated from her. Her so-called best friend is disgusted by her. Uh, she's between two worlds, wandering between them, doesn't know where to go, where to turn for love. I found her a very poignant character. I liked the Charlie character, in fact.
Yeah, and I think, Kevin, I realize as you speak, you might psychologically explain his behavior by saying he's exploring himself through her, that she is sufficiently similar that he can explore some of his own dilemmas. So she's
Yeah,
British, thinking about going back to Britain. She's single. She was betrayed by her partner. And he can, in a controlled way, in a superior way, he can explore his own positions, reactions to similar things
yeah,
by provoking her into saying things that he can be contemptible of and therefore feel superior and resolve not to adopt in his own psychology. So I think it helps him to get to that point you mentioned earlier that comes late in the book where he says, I'm not going back to Britain. The future is here. I think that long dialogue with Charlotte, where he contradicts her nostalgia, he's exploring his own nostalgia. He's resolving his own dilemma about whether to stay and go. So it's again, it's manipulative. Um, it's not fair.
yeah,
He's not being a good friend of her. He's being quite selfish. He's using her for his own ends. Um, but it's realistic psychology, which again speaks to the fascination of the book. It's a frank, honest insight into the inner psychology of somebody who is somewhat anti-heroic, something you do not see much in fiction.
yeah. I like your analysis. I think that's exactly it. She is a sounding board for his own psychological dilemmas, and he's working them out as he converses with her. That puts it in a better light. Thank George. Thanks you for that. Yeah, he's not uh, deliberately trying to be mean, but it just comes across that way because he's trying to figure things out.
Well, he's not, maybe he's not trying to be mean, but I think he knows that he's not being good to her. I mean, I don't think he's so naive that he is oblivious to the way he's using her. He's
No.
just somewhat careless. He is careless. He treats her casually. Certainly her feelings, her needs. He doesn't take care with her needs. And he's selfish in the way he interacts with her. Uh, which again, it's unsettling. It makes me uncomfortable. There's lots of things about George that make me uncomfortable. His temper, his anti-socialness, but also his manipulativeness, his objectification. He's he's a difficult character to like. I mean, I'll put it like this: I liked the insights into him more than I liked him. So I found Isherwood's style of exposing his innermost character to us, the style of doing that through primarily through inner monologue was absolutely fascinating and quite original. Most of the time, it's quite original, and I couldn't put the book down, but at the same time,
Yeah.
I really was unsettled by George. It's like, oh God, George, I would not want to spend time with you, George. You would not be my friend, George. Um, I would not want to be your student, George. I would not want to be your colleague as a professor, George.
Yeah.
Um,
None of the
I could be
above.
civil to you, but
Yeah.
that's as far as it would
Well,
go.
well, that's almost your would be my almost my highest compliment to a book, that you dislike the protagonist, but you keep reading. That's a real
Yeah,
trick. So
yeah,
hats off, Mr. Isherwood.
yeah,
You, it's a real, it's that's some real prestidigitation at the literary level.
yeah. Indeed, indeed. And in a monologue is not easy because
No,
because it doesn't want to come across as dialogue, external dialogue. Um, there's an authenticity in the way Isherwood does it, where where sometimes George is dissonant, or he's apparently hiding things from himself. So he hides his flaws from himself, which is quite realistic, and then he has these moments of of honesty with himself, such as by about his temper. It's curious why he can't control his temper when he is clearly so upset about losing his temper.
yeah,
Um, yeah. By the way, I mean it's a vice because he doesn't really work on himself, right? He kind of admits vices, but he's not making any effort to correct them.
right. The only thing he's trying to correct is his body. He's trying to remain young. He's trying to. That's very
Yeah,
L.A. That's very California.
maybe that's authentically Californian. Yeah,
That's authentically Californian, and maybe he had that streak of vanity, likely before he
yeah,
came west. But that's the perfect place for such types. If you're going
that's
to be
right.
lavishing attention on your body, but not your character flaws, L.A., you're right in the pocket.
Yeah. Now you mention it, so there's a word that just popped into my mind, and I don't know why it hasn't occurred to me before. He's a bit of a narcissist.
Oh yeah,
You know,
totally. Of
he's
course.
egotistical, he's self-centered, he's vain,
Yeah.
he's he's acting, he's portraying an image of himself which isn't entirely real, although he does have these moments of frankness inside himself. And he fantasizes about terrorizing and killing and torturing
That's
people
right.
and
Yeah.
chopping off their kids' heads.
Yeah. Actually, it goes beyond narcissism and sociopathy.
Yeah,
It's psychopathy. Uh, I think we better close the book now before we completely destroy our character. But again, as you said, it's unputdownable, the book, and in fact, you can
yeah,
read it in one sitting if you are of a
yeah.
mind. You could just read this in one go, 3, 4, 5 hours. You got it.
Yeah, it's quite short. So in my edition, it's only 186 pages long. 186 pages in this edition. It is a short novel.
Right. Mine's
I,
exactly 186. I guess you got the same one I do, but I got this with the surfer on the cover. This is uh, a University of Minnesota Press edition.
mine too. Yeah.
It's the same
I,
one then.
so um, I I think we are running out of time, Kevin. But if you may, I
Yeah.
wanted to discuss one last scene with you, and that is the scene towards the end of the book, which is really the climactic scene
Hmm.
with Kenny. So
Yeah.
We've discussed how Kenny and George go skinny dipping, and then Kenny is in George's house on the excuse that George needs to get Kenny out of those wet clothes. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
Get you out of those
Um,
wet clothes and into a dry martini.
yeah, and a blanket. And then
Yeah.
they do not consummate this thing. So Kenny, I found this scene the most confusing, and I wondered if you could, uh, with your more brilliant mind, elucidate this for me, because Kenny seems to be playing a game here. It's not clear to me that Kenny is homosexual. Certainly, he has a heterosexual relationship with Lois. It's not clear to me that he is genuinely flirting with George because he wants to go to bed with George, or is even thinks it's a possibility. It's more like he's just playing a game. It's unclear whether Kenny
Yeah.
is really homosexual. Kenny is always smiling. He always calls George Sir. He's enigmatic. He's uh, hard to read, and he sort of runs. He literally runs away from some questions. And then there's this strange monologue where George is sitting with a drink, looking at Kenny, who's got this blanket, and the blanket is falling off Kenny's shoulders in a oh, in a what's the right word? In a way that gets George hot and bothered. Um, and then George sort of starts spontaneously talking this monologue, and he says, "I suppose you've decided I'm a dirty old man." And he confirms to Kenny, "Yes." Next page, "I am a dirty old man. 99% of all old men are dirty." And then he goes on and on. It becomes confusing. uh,
Yeah.
it's all very fine and easy for you young things to come to me on campus and tell me I'm cagey. Don't you have a glimmering of how I must feel longing to speak? You asked about my experience, so I told you experience isn't any use, and yet in quite another way it might be. So he's this monologue is very chaotic. It's almost
Yeah.
like he's going around in circles. And then he says, it'd be a miracle if you did understand. Never mind, forget it. Here I am. Here are you in that damned blanket. Why don't you take it right off, for Christ's sake? What made me say that? I suppose you're going to misunderstand that too. You know, he's
Yeah.
it, it's almost like he's taking himself to the brink of saying, Kenny, I want you.
Yeah.
Kenny, I'm a homosexual and I want to sleep with you.
Yeah.
And then this monologue ends with very ambiguous question. So this is a 176 for me. Uh, he says, there's a paragraph. Oh, Kenneth, Kenneth, believe me, there's nothing I'd rather do. That is on in the previous paragraph. You want me to tell you what I know. And by the way, just a reminder, George is conjecturing what Kenny wants from George. He doesn't know what Kenny really wants. Kenny hasn't stated anything he wants from George,
Right.
apart from, you know, uh, I liked how you spoke in class, sort of ambiguity. Um, so you want me to tell you what I know? I want like hell to tell you, but I can't. I quite literally can't, because don't you see, what I know is what I am, and I can't tell you that. It's very confusing.
Yeah.
What the hell is he talking about?
Well, you said,
Um,
yeah. Uh, well, I think it's going to take a far less brilliant mind than yours, Bruce, to tell you what it's all about, and I shall enter the breach. What I wrote here in the margins, and I mark up all my books. They're not library books, folks. Don't worry, they're my own. I said, I wrote in that very passage that you were reading, I said, I know this whole atmosphere, the stealthy homosexual seduction. I, look, hey, lots of us, if you grow up in LA, come on, I've been the target of certain gentlemen who have found me, uh, interesting, shall we say. And I know this whole thing. They know you're a heterosexual, uh, and they know that you know what they're trying to do, so they can't do it in a direct fashion. They're trying to seduce you with their language, with their learning experience, culture, sophistication. I just know the whole thing. I've been exposed to this before. Maybe you have too, but I will speak on my behalf. Yeah, it's a
Certainly, don't forget,
homosexual seduction,
I
but
worked in
yeah.
Santa Monica and San Francisco, so I've been exposed to some of that, obviously.
Okay. Well, I've been exposed to these late night, would you like to come up for a drink, kind of things, and it's like, yeah, we're not gonna, you think the guy understands, but then as you get into your drinks and into the night, you see how the guy is sort of revising his original plan, which was not to, try and seduce you, but now it's going to. I think that's what it is, and in fact, when you have that last paragraph where he is finished speaking, George. For a moment, Kenny's face is quite distinct. It grins dazzlingly. Then his grin breaks up, is refracted, or whatever you call it, into rainbows of light. The rainbows blaze. George is blinded by them. He shuts his eyes, and now the buzzing in his ears is the roar of Niagara. Well, we find out subsequently that apparently he has passed out, but I thought they'd gone to bed together. I thought they might have gone to bed together. This is like a description of the ecstasy of finally bedding this hunky young student of his. I wasn't sure until I went on to read, because it seemed to me that that's where the whole thing was heading, to a
Yeah.
to a seduction scene after the seduction had been um, successfully completed.
And I
That's my
wondered
answer.
too.
That's yeah,
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think the convoluted language in this monologue is kind of realistic of a man who is trying to seduce without being so explicit that it can come back to haunt him, or he can feel rejected. So maybe he can, if he is rejected, he can say, "Well, I wasn't really rejected because I wasn't explicit with what I
that's right.
really wanted." So it's quite authentic. I
Yes,
think, by the way, when that final paragraph of the section where Kenny's face breaks up into rainbows of light and then George passes out, I presume that George worked himself up into such a
could be.
frenzy of, it's the intensity of trying to
Right.
suggest without being explicit, just sort of gave him a little aneurysm or something. He
Yeah,
just
that's
collapsed.
it. That's it. And we know that's where he was headed, because Kenny leaves, and then in bed, George has a sexual fantasy about Kenny while he masturbates. I mean, that's very explicit. So yeah, that's where he wanted to go with this whole thing.
Yeah, although that fantasy in his inner monologue, he switches men
Right.
into the fantasy,
Right.
right? So he tries
Right.
to imagine George tries to imagine Kenny taking up George's offer for Kenny to take Lois for a
Yeah.
tryst in George's
Yeah.
spare bedroom, but
Yeah.
he can't make that realistic. So then he replaces them with the tennis players, and eventually he gets off.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, he's going to say no. That won't work either. He's trying various fantasies out, and he finally gets one that does the trick, right? But
Yeah,
Kenny is at the center of it. He was the mainspring for this
yeah,
fantasy. So
yeah,
it's very clear what George had in mind, and particularly when they come out of the surf together, both naked there, right? And then Kenny goes, after they're drying off. Kenny goes, so do we head to your place? I think Kenny even proposes it, or something like that. But anyway, George responds, where else? And then Kenny started laughing and said, where else? Right. Because George thinks this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship, as it were. And yeah, so his intent is clear, and it would be very strange to me that all of a sudden he's sitting there with Kenny in his little toga outfit and his little shoulder there, and George is getting turned on. That this isn't all part of him trying to get this kid into bed,
Yeah.
regardless of what the words are.
Well,
You
I
don't even
tell
have to
you
read.
what. So his monologue struck me as a third median way of approaching what George wants, which is the worst of all ways. Right? So it's like a
Yeah,
resultant outcome. So he could have the two ways he could have gone. He could have said, "You are a student. I want you to be dry, but I don't want you to misunderstand. It would be totally inappropriate. I don't even know if you're gay. I want you to be dry. You can use the spare room. Nothing's going to happen. Lock the door. You know, uh, do not misunderstand why I invited you into the house, right? That would have been the professional way to handle it. The other way would have been the totally sexual, to give in to his sexuality. He could have been straight up and says, "Look, I'm gay. I think you are flirting with me. You're already here.
yeah,
Why don't you take off the blanket?" Which he keeps saying to Kenny, "Your blanket is slipping off you." He's sort of trying to put the imagery into Kenny's head that the blanket should come off. Imagine if the blanket just came off. That's the other way. He could have been straight up about it, but he's in the middle, which actually makes me disrespect him more. So he is not self-disciplined. He is not honest, and it's almost like he's being dishonest with himself. It gets back to that idea that he's giving himself an excuse to say, if I am rejected, I can pretend I'm not really being rejected. And you know, again, it's an honest insight into a very honest, a very real psychology, but it doesn't give. This is really towards the end of the book. This is within the last 10 pages. And the novelist Isherwood does not give you an opportunity to say, aha, finally at the end, there's something I can respect George for.
right.
I did not come away with any respect for George.
That's right. A certain redemption through renunciation.
Yeah,
No, 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 no. He's all in, but he's not, as you say. He's all in, but he's not. And yeah, you don't respect that. You want someone to come down on one side or the other. And I didn't respect him as I was reading that. So you put into very clinical language what I was feeling the whole time. I said, I think this is creepy. This is creepy, right? To put it into
yeah,
the demotic,
it's very
right?
creepy. Yeah, and
Yeah.
obviously in today's day and age, it would be the end of his career, and he would be cancelled unless he can play homosexual privilege, as you can say.
Right.
Well, I'm not. It's not pervy
Yeah.
because
No, no.
I'm not
Yeah.
heterosexual.
Yeah. That's another thing that was going through my mind. Like, how would all of this play out, not just in literature, but in real life? How would this all play out in the Cal State system, shall we say, not the UC? They're six of one, half dozen of the other. Today, it wouldn't. It wouldn't. You wouldn't. It wouldn't at all. Just walking to the bookstore with a guy,
Yeah,
and he
that was
buys, and he
inappropriate. Yeah,
that was yeah, walking, and he buys you a pencil sharpener. Talk about symbolism, huh? I mean,
that's right.
you
All
know,
right, here's
you
here's
would
my female
you would
part.
probably you would probably have some tattletale saying, I saw Professor George and Kenny in the bookstore, and Kenny bought him a pencil sharpener. That would get you canned immediately.
That's right. For George to stick his pencil in,
That's
no
right.
less.
I'll sharpen your pencil, baby. That's right. Yeah.
All right. So I think in conclusion, just to remind the reader, George is going to have a heart attack. So maybe the state he worked himself up into with Kenny passes out, maybe that's related to the heart attack that he has later that night.
If
Maybe
he has, yeah,
that's the recompense.
could be. I mean, so I guess the final question is, do you think he has the heart attack, or do you think he does not have the heart attack?
Yeah,
You
I
say he
do.
does. You think he
I
does?
do. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that Isherwood, like I said earlier, he's identifying with George to the extent that he has to imagine what might happen to himself, Isherwood, and so he conjectures what happens to George,
Hmm.
just because he's identifying so much with George.
I'll buy it. I'll take your version of
It,
it then.
it's open to interpretation. I realize.
No,
Well, look,
I like
Kevin.
your you it coheres better with your interpretation.
Well, I mean, there these last chapters are quite tense, right? And they're certainly emotionally charged and physically charged, and he ends up masturbating, as you say, and uh, that sort of relieves the tension, for want of a better phrase.
But then he, for want of a better phrase, screws it up again with all these imaginings of George in bed, and also he has this strange vision of individuals in his life as little tide pools at the beach. And I thought it was okay. It was a nice little foray into a long, extended metaphorical passage. Thought it wasn't bad. And then
Yeah,
we go from that to the Kenny fantasy, and then we go from that to the authorial fantasy, if it was, of George dying. So, yeah, there are some uh, significant passages after the action in and of itself ends with Kenny just departing. Uh,
yeah.
and yeah,
I mean,
so
it's very quick. It's a very quick ending, actually. After this long, tense interaction between Kenny and George, you have the masturbation. He sort of falls asleep. He has an inner dialogue where he resolves that he's not going to go to England. He's going to stay in California and find love, and then he dies.
yeah, essentially, yeah. With these little yeah, that's it. You're right. It's exactly the order of march. Correct. Yeah,
He goes through
right,
the waters of his consciousness, which is a very interesting simile,
right,
and then he dies
right. I mean,
in his sleep.
that's yeah. He dies a very peaceful death. If he does, I take your interpretation. Uh, he dies a very peaceful death. There are no, like, even physical manifestations of his death, as Isherwood describes. He 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 segues from sleep into death,
Yeah,
and it's sort of like the beginning of the book where he segues out of sleep into life, but it's a very slow process, which is described in painstaking detail by Isherwood. So the book ends where it starts. So, the classic symmetry of a classic, like, novel of a certain kind. And it's
yeah,
in a proud tradition of not maybe ending where it started, but it's a day in the life, a day in the life
yeah,
of Ivan Denisovich,
yeah,
Ulysses. One of these great. I think it's a great novel.
yeah,
Maybe small G because it's small. It's not Ulysses. It's not War and Peace, but I think it's a great novel. It takes you through a fellow's day, uh, in a certain milieu, a certain part of society, and yeah, it does the trick. You go from the beginning in bed to the end in bed, and between that you have had the the activities, the ponderings, the reflections, the interactions of the human animal,
yeah.
and
It's a
me
very
and me being
unique
from
book.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry,
No, that's
Kevin.
it.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
And again, the extra 5-10% he gets from me is that I think he got Los Angeles quite well. and that adds to my pleasure.
Right. This is a book that no reader will forget. It is very original, very unique. Um, you will not forget this, and it's a quick read. I highly
Yep.
recommend it.
Yep.
So thank
Great.
you, Kevin McAleer.
Thank you.
Thank you for recommending this. I have not read it before. This is my first time. I enjoyed reading it, and I thank you that you recommended I read it and that we got to discuss it. Thank you, sir.
No, Bruce, thanks a lot. It was a pleasure as always.